The truth shall set you free, but it might hurt like a mother.
You do vulnerability, or vulnerability does you.
The path to enlightenment is paved with many different personality profiles.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Excuses are negative stories we tell ourselves when things feel too difficult or too uncomfortable.
Well, you're ugly and your mama dresses you funny.
Welcome to the Epoch Podcast, your weekly dose of mental foreplay. My name's Ben.
I'm Jen.
I'm Weston.
I'm Joni.
Christina?
I'm David.
And this week we're doing a bit of a mashup of topics. We're taking the idea of radical honesty, something kind of put forward by Dr. Brad Blanton, and probably others that I'm unaware of, and also Brené Brown and her famous TED Talk on vulnerability, and then she had a follow-up where she got into
Courage?
vulnerability and courage on a 2019 Netflix special. I think these two are very complementary. I think they work well together. The idea that a lot of it has to do with the story we tell ourselves and the energy we put into our ego, whether it's conscious or not. So I'm curious as to how this was received as you went through this. Probably a great place to start, with radical honesty is within the self, within the individual. So did you guys notice that as you were watching or listening, that anything kind of like tripped your radar as like, ooh, no, like I don't like that at all? Or was it just like one big happy experience the whole time?
I think for me, I relate a lot to the layers of vulnerability. And I think Brené Brown said something about, vulnerability is not sharing all of your skeletons on Facebook or talking about, you just don't share your deepest, darkest secrets with everyone that you see. You have to build that relationship and build that trust to share that vulnerability piece. And so that's something that really jived with me, because we all have those one or two people on Facebook who kind of share a little too much. And
I was just reading one of those before our recording.
Yes.
That's funny because I think in the pre-record here, I was actually attributing that to Blanton, but maybe it was Brené, or maybe it was both, because they do overlap. And another person I neglected to mention up front was, I don't know if she's a doctor or not.
She is.
Lauren Zander. Is that who you think I'm thinking of?
The one you sent the link to?
Yes.
Yeah.
I personally, we kind of brainstorm these topics, a ways in advance. It gives us a chance to research them all. And I picked up a podcast from Tom Bilyeu where he interviewed Lauren Zander, I don't know, several months ago. And she got into this idea of the story that we tell ourselves and the amount of mental hoops that we jump through, the internal conversation between our higher self and our lower self, and how we justify all these things that go against what our higher self really wants. And it has really changed my life. Like I've always kind of thought that I was an honest person. I didn't realize I was full of shit when I talked to myself. So, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but we're talking to ourselves all day. So if you're lying to yourself constantly, like that's a problem.
Well,
I'm the only person with that problem, apparently.
I gave a head nod.
It goes along with the quote that I like. I couldn't find it before this, but I know I referenced it in another podcast, but the concept of that people don't really think so much as thoughts just appear in their heads and they just believe them. And that's something that I've thought about actually for a very long time, is that you don't have to believe everything that appears in your head. And it's actually wise not to, because most of the time it's, like you said, Matt, baloney.
Well, sure, especially if it's unintentional. I think, as a group, we've all probably dove pretty pretty deep into the idea and the importance of identity and the importance of being intentional with the identity that we create. However, our ego can also create an identity that we will, die to protect, but it's not necessarily something that we've done intentionally. Does that ring any bells for anybody? Or?
I guess for me, so another guy who talks about this stuff is Dr. Gay Hendricks. He calls it micro truths, and it's the truths they're easy to ignore. For me, this entire exercise with studying vulnerability with Brené Brown, and radical honesty, micro truths, all of those things, it still comes back to me back to the Four Agreements and the Toltec wisdom tradition with Don Miguel Ruiz of we're all dreaming, right? We've all built a dream. We've all built a construct in our mind. We have this, and that dream has different layers: our personal dream, our family dream, our community dream, our country dream, and the world dream, and everything like that. And so this awareness that everything is a construct. I think the radical honesty guy, whatever his name is,
Brad Blanton.
Brad Blanton, he talks a lot about to notice. He just says, just notice the truth, and noticing is his word. But then you go to the power of now, and you talk about Eckhart Tolle, and he talks about being the watcher, right? Then you go to Miguel Ruiz, and he talks about witnessing. And so there's all of these different traditions or all of these different concepts that kind of center around the reality that we build a reality in our mind that isn't the full story. We think it is. And so all of our emotions, our experience, our joy, our pain, our everything comes from the construct we create. And what I found is that my opening line where I said, the path to enlightenment is paved with many different personality profiles, is because I think, and Joni can speak for herself, but when we came across radical honesty, we started to laugh. I was like, oh my gosh, this is Toltec for D personalities, right? For dominant personalities who, and if you don't know the DISC personality profile, D for dominant, I for influencer, S for steadfast, and C for conscientious. And so D personalities, I'm 100% sure, will lean towards something more like radical honesty, whereas an S personality, their immediate reaction is, well, that's just really mean, right? And they don't want to hurt people's feelings, and so they want to go a different way towards deconstructing this construct. And it's so funny, to the point where I went to the Radical Personality website, and on the front page there's pictures, and one of the biggest pictures is actually a lady that we know who our memory of her was like, holy crap, she's dominant. Like,
you're the most abrasive.
And yet she's on the Radical Honesty website. And so it was just a confirmation, like, it's a beautiful tool, but I do think you're going to find that a lot of people think it's mean, or it's unnecessary, or it's too abrasive, or whatever. And that is what's I've found interesting, is this is right in line with a broader story that I'm studying, which is to unpack these constructs that we've created for ourselves. And there's different ways in which to do it, and the different languages and the different personalities that go with it. That it's simply, for me, just another version of Toltec. It's another version of the power of now, and it is all very much how to get out of the prison of our minds.
I know personally, not to get too far away from what you said in the beginning, like, awareness is the word that came to me last night when I think we had finished watching Brené Brown's Netflix special, and I was just trying to kind of get to the base of all this, like the core of all this stuff. And I think awareness is a great way to put it, to be aware of the story you're telling yourself, straight up. I mean, but to what you said towards the end, I'm super curious now. Like, I'm a high I on the DISC profile. I'm like, well, which one's for me? I gotta find that now.
And
in my opinion, the eyes would probably like Miguel Ruiz the most.
Ooh, I haven't even.
He emphasizes fun. He emphasizes being happy, and he emphasizes a lighter version of the same story.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I mean,
Jen.
I was just going to elaborate on the story that you tell yourself. And something that, what's her name? Lauren Zander was talking about, and things that we've talked about extensively with Austin, is that a lot of people are just like, oh, it's just myself, but it's not really just yourself. You have your brain, you have your heart, you have your body, you have your soul, and your spirit.
I like her terms of head, heart, and hoo-ha.
No longer my body, it's a hoo-ha. I love it. But sometimes that can be confusing, because literally 1 second you're thinking, feeling one thing, and then a second later you're thinking, feeling something different. And then what does that mean? Am I crazy? But no, it's just these different pieces of you that come together to make you, and sitting in there and sitting in the moment and trying to connect it to where it's coming from, why it's coming from, and adjusting accordingly.
So that brings up a good question in my mind. So you have these different voices. You have your soul speaking, your spirit speaking, your head speaking. And I remember listening to, I think it was Eckhart Tolle. He was telling the story of how he was walking down the street and he saw a lady walk by who was talking to herself, and just like everything that was going on in her head, she was just spewing out loud. And we look at someone like that and we're like, oh my gosh, they're crazy. And then he realized, he's like, wait, that's the same thing going on in my head, but I just don't say it out loud. So who's the crazy one? Are we all crazy and she's just saying it? So with this radical honesty, I personally wasn't a fan of anything I found from Dr. Brad Blanton.
Not even the spot where you're supposed to, when you get to that, I think it's the third level, where you're supposed to like masturbate in front of your spouse to orgasm. There was one where you were supposed to get naked in front of a whole group and videotape yourself talking about everything you don't like about yourself.
Wow.
Or go confront people at their homes regardless of whether or not the police show up. There were those stories.
Oh,
but it makes me wonder what voices we're supposed to be listening to, what voices we're supposed to be sharing, because do we share every voice in our head? Because otherwise we're going to look like the crazy person going down the street. Where is the place for a filter? What is your filter? When should you use it? I think that was the biggest question that all of these people brought up in my mind, is what is the filter and how should you be using it?
And one of the things you shared with me that you found, I didn't find it or look at it, but was the cultural shift or swing from the culture of politeness and home ec, kind of training, where if you can't say something nice, don't say something at all, to now where our culture values authenticity and vulnerability and honesty and all of those things. And so authenticity kind of has a lot of people, the immediate perception is, well, I'm going to be authentic, then I can't be polite. If I'm going to be vulnerable and honest, then it's going to hurt people's feelings. And so there's this war of like, well, I was taught to be polite and I was taught to be tactful, but our culture is realizing that we're building a construct on a bunch of lies, right? And that there's more the rates for suicide are higher now than they've ever been, because I watched a great thing on the expectation gap and how our society we have made everything so polished and perfect, and there's not a picture that somebody hasn't, we put filters on everything, we take the best pictures of all sorts of experiences, and people want to go on vacation. He showed you think that the Taj Mahal always looks like this.
Oh, right.
And it shows this amazing picture of the Taj Mahal, and he says when it actually looks like this, and it's like crowded as hell and there's trash everywhere, and and so we build these expectations for our lives, for our vacations, for our income, for our bodies, and then the gap between our expectations and our reality creates a lack of happiness, and it creates a lack of authenticity. It creates the need to maintain the lies, maintain the construct. And his thing was basically, I think the culture is shifting, and it was extremely fascinating when you shared that with me, that, we were all taught polite, home ec. My grandma, I think about, how some of the stuff she put up with for years. They had problems like my grandparents had problems like any couple, but I know for a while it was pretty bad. And at least that's what I was told. And yet you wouldn't know, because my grandma was just super polite all the time. And now we view that as weakness. We view that as dishonesty. We view that as a betrayal of trust when somebody's polite. And so how do we deal with this shift when we don't really, I think tools like this can push against some of those things that we were trained. And I find it very interesting to find these little fear points in myself of, the balance between being tactful and honest without being a liar and overly polite,
Well, I feel like it's one of those things where the pendulum swings. Like, it was so far one direction, and then the tendency is to go so far the other direction, and just excess. And it makes me think, like, something that I've been thinking about through the stuff that I was seeing was the difference between honesty versus truth. Like, you can be honest about something that you're going through with something that you're thinking or feeling, and that's good, and that's being authentic, but it shouldn't stop there. Like, there can be, in my mind, there is truth beyond potentially what you're stuck in or what you're feeling or thinking, that kind of stuff. And so I think it feels to me like the tendency right now is to, like with some of the stuff you were saying, Joni, that guy was talking about, like, just put it all out there and that's just it. This is me, whatever. And okay, just because something is the way that you are right now, or the way that you're experiencing something right now, does not mean you need to stop there and say, it's just how it is. And that's something that I was having a little bit of friction with Lauren Zander when I was watching some of her stuff, because on the one hand, it would feel like she was saying, just be real with yourself. This is who you are, blah, blah, blah. You're not going to change. But then on the other hand, she was also saying, like, change to be how you want, sort of. And so I felt like she was kind of saying two different things, and I was having a little bit of difficulty, like, totally getting on board with where she was exactly going. I don't know if anybody else had any issue with some of that kind of stuff, but that was my main thing, was there's honesty, but then there's truth beyond quote unquote honesty or authenticity, I feel like.
That's one of the truths underneath being honest with somebody is that you wouldn't have, like he talks about, if you have issues with your parents or your friend and you're hurt and you're offended and it's like the fact that you're hurt, the fact that you're offended, the fact that you're angry is evidence that you care. So the truth is you care, right? The honesty is the things that cause the hurt and the pain and that. And so one of the blogs or one of the podcasts he was on, a guy said, I went and I read your book. I got through the second chapter and I went and had called a meeting with my best friend, John. And then it ended in a knockdown, drag out fight. And the guy goes, did it really end there? He goes, what? And he goes, no. You say it ended with it. Was that the last time you talked to him? Was that the end of the relationship? And he just called him on it. Like, no, it didn't end there. We say it. We make these. Well, it ended in a fight. Are you still talking to them? Have you gone past that? Have you worked through it? And the guy was like, well, yeah, we're still friends and everything. It's like, so it didn't end in a fight. A fight was in the middle of your relationship.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really cool he immediately caught it. Like, did it really end there? Because he goes, it rarely does, which was interesting.
But for someone who's non-confrontational and who doesn't want to fight, the idea of someone just coming at me and just, here's my truth, well, did you really need to say that? Like, it sounds like a personal problem. You can't work through that yourself. Because it all comes down to they're all personal issues.
Mm-hmm.
So really the other person has nothing to do with it. And I tend to be an internal processor anyway, but the idea of just confronting people with everything that's bothering me and making it their problem when in actuality it's my problem. So that brings up, what voice do you listen to at that point? Are you listening to the one that's angry and hurt right now and go follow through on that? Or are you listening to the one that tells you to just be calm and sort it out? And I don't know.
Well, I feel like that that's just about relationships and what level of communication you want to have in your relationship, I guess. Because did you guys watch the Brene Brown thing?
Mm-hmm.
Because what she was talking about when she told the story of her and her husband going swimming, which was something that they did a lot when they were younger or whatever, I don't know. Anyway, and so she was feeling all these like happy emotions and connectedness and all this stuff. And he was in a completely different place. He was having a panic attack and different things. And you can watch the video and see it for yourself. But the point being, they were having two very different experiences, and the way that they were connecting with each other was just totally blowing past each other because of the things that were going on in their own minds that they weren't sharing with each other in an open way. And so it feels like, yeah, I don't know, it goes into the vulnerability thing. And the vulnerability piece being, I think what she said is that vulnerability is having the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome. And I think that's huge. Like, that to me was a very helpful definition of it, I guess, because yeah, I have in the past felt like, we have to share stuff to be vulnerable. Well, not necessarily. But, well, not necessarily like all out there barfing it all out to everybody, but like Matt was saying, or whoever was saying.
I think Jen was saying that earlier.
Okay. But being vulnerable would be, I guess, being open to the confrontation potentially happening if you share something with somebody. And maybe, like, I don't know you personally, but I think that that's easy to just keep all of our feelings to ourselves and say that we're dealing with our own stuff, when what if it is maybe sometimes that we just don't want to be vulnerable with somebody, or maybe we just don't want them to, like you were saying, bring that to us, and so we just keep our own stuff to ourselves also. For myself, it's easy for me to say because I personally do prefer to have that give and take in relationships, and it feels like I can't really know somebody if they're not willing to go back and forth with me like that, or I don't feel like I feel very close to them if we don't have that. But I guess for myself, when I was watching the Brene Brown thing, and I wish David had been able to watch it because I was curious what his take on it would be. But her talking about that story with her husband, I was like, wow, I guess like David and I have had vulnerability with each other. Like, that's a precedent that we've set in our marriage from the beginning, which was kind of weird in the beginning and a little bit difficult, but I feel like it served us really well overall, because we don't have any trouble sharing anything with each other, and we make it a point to share things with each other, even if it's stuff that in the beginning felt weird. Like, I was insecure in the beginning of our marriage, and for a long time actually, but stemming from different relationships that I'd seen go to crap. And so we set a precedent for ourselves that we would talk about it if we were ever attracted to somebody else, if we had weird thoughts or feelings, just to clear the air. Because for me, it was too easy for me to be telling myself the story that he was thinking all these things about somebody else, and like if we're out in public or whatever, that he was just thinking about someone else and not me and whatever, and that would hugely affect everything. So he was very gracious and understanding with me, and he would just share, and so then I would share, and we just kept everything clear between us in that way. And I just feel like it set a really good open line of communication for our marriage. And now over the years, it's led to the point where I don't feel insecure in that anymore. And so I don't know. I mean, obviously everybody's relationships are different, and we all work the way that we need to work in our relationships. But that was just something for ourselves that we set in place.
Well, and I also think there's two different realities happening right now. There's that individual internal reality where, I have a voice in my head, I have a truth, I have a story. And then there's that external where we integrate with society and relationships. And there's voices there that plant truths or ideas into our internal reality. And then we have to decipher through that. And so while they're kind of like two paths happening at the same time. So while we're doing this internal, like, who am I? Who's this voice? We have to interact with spouses and children and bosses and employees. And they're separate, but they're the same. And if we don't work on ourselves, then we can't work with other people, and vice versa. And so it's tying it all together and being vulnerable with yourself internally and then being vulnerable externally with everyone else that makes it work.
I think there's the stories we tell ourselves, and then there's the masks we wear in order to preserve the image that we want others to have of us. And I don't necessarily think they're the same thing. So, you know, like in a marriage, for example, I think, you know, I think it was Blanton that talks about it, but the idea that should be a sanctuary, a place where you don't feel any pressure to wear a mask, where you can just bear it all. And I think that's where he gets into some of those admittedly very weird exercises. But at the same time, you don't have that level of openness maybe with coworkers or people who haven't, like, you don't have that relationship with. I mean, not to shift gears too radically, but I really, really valued what Brene Brown was talking about when it came to having vulnerability in the workplace, and how, you know, like one of the places that she went to said that, hey, we want you to come talk, but we don't want you to talk about vulnerability. Talk about something else. You know, these are the problems we're having, and they were related to, like, we're not innovating, we're not creating. She's like, what are you talking about? Like, if you don't allow for vulnerability in your organization, then failing or failure is off the table. You can't afford to fail. Which means that your creation. Wow, I can't talk at all. Your creativity. There we go. Your creativity or innovation is just completely stifled, and so that this organization's problem, which was those two things, was directly related to their inability or, you know, lack of desire to address vulnerability and have vulnerability be a staple of what they, you know, of their core principles. So I think it definitely is not maybe compartmentalized, but there's definitely different levels for different aspects of life, I think, is what I came across.
The mask that we wear, Matt, that you were talking about, I think it was actually one of the first things I came across with Brad Blanton. I wrote down that we all have the inner us and the outer sales pitch us that we give to the world, and putting it as a sales pitch that it's literally something that we build and put together and market to the world of, this is who we are. We make ourselves look good. We want ourselves to be liked. That really hit home for me, and we definitely do that at work. So I think the point of being authentically us, the definition of that I wrote down is letting go of who we think we are supposed to be and embracing who we actually are. So there's that rub between what we think and our opinions, and then the salesperson, the person we're trying to sell ourselves at work. And I think that happens a lot at work because we're literally hired to fill a position. This is literally who we're supposed to be. So I can imagine being vulnerable in that case would be really hard for people. But then companies, you know, hiring people into a position limit themselves. So I don't know, how do you be vulnerable? How do you be a manager? How do you be a boss and be open to vulnerability, encourage vulnerability in people's lives?
That's a good question.
But, and I feel like there's a third thing too that we is the person that we want to be, that we're actively pursuing. So, and I don't know how that fits in to that what you were just saying. It just, as you were saying it, like that came, like I thought, I was like, there's a third one. There's a third one.
Yeah, that goes back to what Jen was saying, is that, you know, well, this is who I am, and throwing that out there. But then there's also, well, but this is also who I want to be, and that's not who I am, and the disconnect between the two. And so what is your truth? Do you even know what your truth is?
Well, that's Lauren Zander's point. Is like we're pursuing all these things, and we're going after what we think we want, but we have no idea what we actually want, because we've layered so much bullshit on top of it that you have to clean that off before you can even get to it.
I'm just curious, because this is something that I've kind of recognized in the last couple of days, week, that I'm almost a completely different person depending if I'm professional work Jen or if I'm, you know, at home Jen. And so I was just curious if you guys see that, if you're maybe putting on a different face or mask, depending on who you are with, or I don't know, and what you think about that.
Well, I know I was talking with the late great Chris Teasdale about this exact thing, and we kind of shared sentiments on it. But I was telling him, I was like, dude, I feel like I've played a lot of roles, like a lot of characters throughout the years, and in the last couple of years, I just kind of really began to do that work to kind of figure out who I am, and and does it have to change depending on like every different situation I'm in. So it's I don't know, it's definitely been a journey. Or an interesting dance, if you want to put it in Alan Watts terms. But
I feel like
that's.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Christina.
Austin was
No, you.
first.
No, you. Austin comes.
Stop being polite. Just freaking do it.
Just say your truth.
It's the slight delay that causes this problem sometimes in the internet connection.
It's our crappy internet.
Yeah.
Oh no.
I was just going to say that I feel like, and I was thinking the same thing too, Matt, when Joni was talking about the person that we want to be. Like, it's that whole thing of who are we when we're consciously choosing versus who are we when we're just reacting or living subconsciously or whatever. And I think I'd feel like, for example, with the social media stuff, that is generally what people are consciously choosing to put out. And I think it generally reflects on at least what they think that they want or who they want to be portrayed as. And that can have obviously lots of layers as far as why and what they're trying to meet.
That's a sale. It's a sales pitch.
Well, but the thing is that it can also be who they authentically want to be. It doesn't necessarily have to be like this polished, fake thing. But a conscious, like for example, when you take a picture of something, generally you want to capture the good parts of the thing for a reason. It's not only because you want to ignore the bad stuff necessarily, but because as humans we enjoy beauty, and there's a skill and a talent to spotting the beauty, and sometimes even the perspective on something that, like taking a picture, for example, a space that isn't that great looking, but what can we do with a skill? How can we see the perspective in a good way? And I don't feel like that all has to be bad. I don't feel like choosing the good parts of things necessarily means that we are having to ignore the bad parts. Yes, that does happen a lot. But I think there is, for one thing, focusing on good is something that is wise. It's good to focus on things that you have to be grateful for and all that kind of stuff. Like it elevates the things that you want in your life. And so I think it's really just, again, I feel like we're such a broken record sometimes. It just comes back to intention and why are you doing it, and being honest with yourself about why you're doing something. But if you are doing it with intention and with the goal of elevating the good, then I think that's relevant. And that's not being inauthentic. Because sure, we can just barf out all the negative stuff, but that's not necessarily being valuable either.
I'm curious whether the fact that I'm curious whether the fact that people of how people interpret that, because it might be the case that we want to show the good, or we want to make our plate of macaroni look awesome when we put it on Instagram, and then there's somebody there that interprets it like, oh my word, I wish I could make macaroni like that. Such a good plate of macaroni. I'm such a klutz. I can't do it. I burn the pasta every time I try to boil it. And so, how much of the current social media environment is not just people trying to do the whole sales pitch thing to paint yourself in a better light, but how much of it is that internal dialogue, that the lies that we tell ourselves by looking at somebody's macaroni and saying, dang, that's a good plate of macaroni, and I'm never going to be good enough to make macaroni like that.
Yeah, personal story.
That's for that one guy I was talking about. He talked about the expectation gap being our source of happiness. He attributes 3 different ways we get expectations. One is our imagination, right? So we think about what we choose a president based on what we imagine, what we think they're going to do, what they promise us. The other one is a comparison, where we compare ourselves to other people. So that's your macaroni. My expectations are that I'll be as good as somebody else at macaroni, and because I don't meet that, if I was, and it's all about perspective, right? If you saw somebody else's macaroni that was twice as bad as yours, you would feel really good about yourself. You see somebody else's macaroni who's twice as good as yours, you feel really bad about yourself. And then the third one is your past, right? So I talk about, if you take somebody who has the same average income over the 40-year period, and you have someone start at the high income and end with a low income, versus someone start with a low income and end with a high income, same average over the 40-year period, but the person who went high to low is going to be significantly more unhappy because of their past, and it's a defeating trajectory. So these different ways we get our expectations and then become part of those voices. I find it interesting, all of these methods, all these mechanisms. For me, the Toltec with Miguel Ruiz, I keep hearing you guys are talking about different elements of, the lies we tell ourselves. And I just keep hearing him talk about the dream and the illusions that we give ourselves. We talk about the different voices in our head. He calls it the metote, or the judge and the parasite and the victim and all this. These truths are universal, and I keep hitting my mic. These truths are universal, and they're so specialized to the individual that I'm really grateful to have found radical honesty. I think there's a lot of meat on those concepts, and then there's a few bones for me that I'm going to spit out. But then you go to these other concepts that are really soft and mild, like Eckhart Tolle and the power of now. And some people are like, well, that's well and good, but what do I do with the guy who's, a jerk at the office, right? So finding these different balances between them and understanding that you are building your own world of expectations for who you are supposed to be. And I can't help but think of, you guys talk about the person you present to the world, the person you really are, and the person you want to be. And I think there's a gap between who we really are and who we think we are. Like there's a whole nother person in there, and that's who we think we are. And that's the one that it sounds like Lauren Zander faces a lot of just dealing with the real you and kind of unlayer bullshit. But I find that that's where most of the work needs to be done for a lot of people, is nobody thinks they're the problem. Nobody goes, you know what? I'm the problem with the world today. My political views are the problem. My perspectives on how work should be. My attitude at work is the problem. My attitude in this marriage is the problem. My attitude with my parents is the problem. Nobody thinks they're the problem. And so that radical honesty, beginning with yourself and realizing that you've built a dream and who you think you are. And I love it with Miguel Ruiz. And one of my favorite things he says is, you don't have to be who you think you are. And that, if you just let that sink in, that will kind of like, it's like acid in a pool. I mean, it will start to clean out so much junk if you just realize you don't have to be who you think you are.
No, that's super true, man. And as you're talking, I think we're talking about political stuff, and nobody admitting to be the problem. I love when you witness these arguments on Facebook, for example, and you're like, I'm not going to click on it, but you click on it, and then and you go through and you see somebody who's so clearly wrong, but can never admit it. They just keep deflecting, and you're like, how skewed is your vision of yourself and your argument and the world as a whole that you think you're right here? I often find myself like, I remember an argument that somebody had with you, Austin, and I was just like, in what world does this person think they're remotely right? Like, how did you get to this place where you are so delusional? It's
I remember that one. It was so funny.
I just remember thinking like, you're literally talking to a philosopher, and the thing is, and tell this person that they've never considered X, Y, and Z. I'm like, what?
It was pretty funny.
This is going way back in the argument, but or not argument, the conversation. Joni, you were talking about cultural shifts, and it reminded me of a video of Charlie Chaplin, and he talks about how people have become thinking machines and how we need to begin to feel again, and how that resonated so much with me. And then at the same time, somebody else read like, I love that whole speech, but when he gets to that part, I'm like, oh, all people are doing nowadays is feeling. Oh, they need to freaking use their brains. I'm like, man, like there's like people are so clearly in different places that the cultural shift is again, I think it comes back to a transition in ages, but like just people are in radically different spots. I don't know.
Well, not to mention like personalities and background.
Sure.
Life experiences all tie into that. So
That's what I got in the YouTube video I watched. I think it was called something about being polite versus frank. If you YouTube it, you'll find the video. It was a great video. And it did talk about the shift in the age and how we were in this period where being polite was highly valued. And now that's not the thing that's being valued the most. Now being your authentic self is what's being valued. And as they were contrasting and comparing the two and going through the differences, and to me it really came down to personality types. Like there are S's, which I'm a CS, so I'm very logical and very in tune with how what I do is going to make other people feel. So those are things that I value. So when it comes to confrontation and being my authentic self, that's something that I add to the equation. And I realize that other personality types may not add those things to the equation. So I think, Austin, did you bring up the different, I know you brought up like power of now and the radical honesty, and that there's different, like all the same message is coming out, but I do feel like it kind of hits different personality types and how people deal with their internal world and their external world, and how you interact with people and how you process things and what you value comes into that as well.
I was actually thinking about doing, we should create an infographic for the different terminologies and the different authors and concepts that essentially talk about this same thing. And it's just so crystal clear to me that it's about personalities. There's also Thomas Troward and The Power of Decision. I can't remember the author's name. Raymond Charles Barker. And that's more of a conscientious, like scientific approach to the mind and how it works and everything like that. And so you have these relational, soft approaches like Eckhart Tolle. You have the more fun, life is supposed to be enjoyable, like Miguel Ruiz. You have your, take charge, get stuff done, be efficient, change the world, which is this radical honesty and vulnerability stuff. And then you have the, understand the mind and the intricacies of how everything works like a clock. And that's your Thomas Troward and your Raymond Charles Barker stuff. But it's all very much around that I've, and for me, being a C who loves data and loves to research and loves to process, having all of them, I'm like a kid in a candy store.
He's been reading them all.
I'm devouring everything I can and come up with a unified theory of the human experience.
There you go.
I think it's so interesting in the sense that like you guys are both seeing the parallels between the personality styles and how these things fit with the different presentations of this similar concept. And at the same time, those different personality tests, for example, are designed for different areas of your life. Whereas a disc might be aimed more at your professional one, personality plus maybe more for relationships and whatnot. But just like I think about Jen was talking about compartmentalizing earlier. And I think about there's most of my life like I'm a phlegmatic sanguine. If you get into personality plus, I so go with the flow. But there are certain things where I am like an OCD butthole, like, and it's not that I don't think I'm being intentionally inconsistent in my personality. It's just that certain parts of life really resonate with me in a certain way, and other ones I feel like I've got to attack another way. There's places where I've got, I guess, sensitivity to somebody doing it their own way, and there's parts where somebody mentioned interacting at the office. I used to shout at my boss, like I was that guy.
That's a radical honesty.
I mean, he was a D, no doubt. Like in the profile sense, not in the.
I was like, what does that mean again? 'Cause, yeah.
He was a dominant personality, and so the fact that I would sometimes do things differently than he did, but it accomplished the mission. It was safe. It was by the book, as far as regulations were concerned. But it wasn't the way that he would have done it. And God bless him. I love him. He's a friend, still is. Man, like we would just something didn't click right, and I would just shout right back. Like I got to walk in the door, and like 30 seconds into it, we're just going. Like, because he came in early, like to check my work or something like that, and just 3:00 in the morning. No, not jiving.
I think there's a reality to that we do put on, a different mask or a different face when we're in different environments. You are a different person when you're at home than you are at work. And I think that's okay. I think the important part is just recognizing that and making that as a conscious choice that no, when I'm at work, I have to be the boss and I have to put on this face to get the job done. I've certainly been in that position, and I think that's okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But being aware of it. And I think most of the population is completely unaware of any of this. So just being aware, I think, is the biggest key.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's your ego talking. You think you're on nobody else.
I guess for me, the reason why I brought that question up is because naturally I'm an introvert and I kind of just want to like chill and relax and just go with the flow. But then I go to the 9-to-5 job and I'm in middle management and I have to manage people and all their junk, and I have to hold people accountable and get their perspective and create an action plan and do all these things that I'm like, I love to do. I thrive in that. But then that drains me. And so when I come home, I'm kind of just like, I'm not my best. I can't I don't have the stamina to continue doing all of those things or find a balance. And so that's something I'm sure nobody's ever experienced before or not ever lived in. So it's just finding for me that balance and how can I give and take a little bit here and a little bit there to kind of level it out so it's not such a dramatic me.
I'm curious on this call. How many of you, I have these two sayings floating around in my head. The old saying, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Right? Versus the idea of if you can't say something authentic, then you're a liar.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because that's kind of our new culture, right? That if you're not going to tell me the truth, then you're just lying to me. And between those two ideas, I'm curious kind of where you lean more towards. I mean, there's a big measure of truth to both of them, but do you lean more towards authentic truth or polite holding your peace?
Well, I know what I end up saying to my kids more often than not, and that's like, hey, if you don't have anything nice to say, because the truth is flowing and you're not exactly putting it in a nice way. Like,
See, my question there is how many times is what they're saying the truth? Because I know that my children say things that are not nice and not true.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty accurate. Our children are accurate.
So-and-so
to get a rise or something.
like,
So-and-so's
I'm annoyed by so-and-so too. Austin, can you ask your question again?
Just there's a measure of truth to both concepts. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Versus if you can't tell me the truth, then you're a liar. And which one do you lean more towards? Because it's probably a little bit of both, but which one do you favor?
I feel naturally that I'm running like 3 different processes or processors in my head. So professionally, we have a strength-based approach. So you can say, I'm disappointed in your work ethic or whatever, but you can say, hey, you're doing a really good job going to work. Thank you. Let's work on X, Y, and Z.
Thank you for showing up.
Thank you for showing up.
Excellent showing up. You show up more than anyone.
But it's really true because on the flip side, I have an experience where I was asked to call a parent and check in with them about a certain situation. And I said the word concerned, and she flipped her lid and got really mad. And she's like, I just want to talk to so-and-so. I'm like, so-and-so told me to call you. And so words matter, and what I say and what feels good to me might not feel good to you. And so in my head, that I'm always processing that, like, I'm going to say it this way. Oh, but I know that, we've had this conversation or we have this point. And so I tailor what I say to people because I want to make sure that what I'm saying matters to them, and they can connect on a level that we can both connect on. And it doesn't bother me. I have the personality where it doesn't bother me that I have to do something a certain way for myself personally, but kind of more of a chameleon. Like, I want to connect with you, and I'm going to connect with you the way that you want to be needed to be connected with. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's what I do.
And it does make me think of it, like, have we created a society like, you need to be authentic with me, just don't hurt my feelings? Like, we created
correct.
I demand that you be. I demand you don't lie to me and you be authentic. But if the moment you hurt my feelings, we're done. So,
but it's not necessarily feelings. It could be past experiences or connections, and it's just those trigger words where I don't know what you're bringing to the table, and I don't know that what I say or how I could say it could affect you, and so it's just being mindful of how can I connect with you in a mutual meaningful way. And I think there's a way to be honest, and there's a way to be hurtful, and then you try to find the common ground.
See, I feel like a whole lot of this is just that people don't know how to deal with negative feelings, how
That's
to
true.
process them. And so immediately when those negative feelings arise, then their first instinct is to get away, to separate from those feelings or to whatever. And that's when you have the problem that you're expressing right now, that they get, whatever, I need to talk to so-and-so or whatever, I need to get away from this because they know how to talk to me and make me not feel so bad about this, and so I feel like it's a whole lot of, we want people to be honest with us, but when that honesty brings up something that I don't like, I don't know what to do with it.
That Brene Brown said something about that in her Netflix thing. She said it's so much easier to so much easier to cause pain than to feel pain. So like people just lashing out when they start to feel something, as opposed to sitting with it and being honest with themselves about why and like evaluating it.
And it's also like, I mean, what Matt was talking about, that conversation that you were having with that dude, maybe he just does not understand. He might know that what he was saying to you was complete bull crap, but he just doesn't know how to publicly admit that he was wrong.
Dude, it was purely two egos at certain points.
So I mean, that's just, I mean, it's just a natural way. It's a natural defense mechanism.
Well, something I thought that was really interesting is that I responded to Austin right away when he asked this question, and I put it in a way that I put it on my kids, how I talk to my kids, and then just listening to other people trying to get past the filter of my ego, I realized my natural setting is pretty hypercritical. Getting a nod from the crowd here,
and hence our children are hypercritical, but your criticism is very accurate and on point, and it's very
right. And
hold you to the wire,
right? And so I'm constantly filtering. I am constantly filtering because if I didn't, I would just be a miserable asshole to be around. And it's not that I don't like. I think I also see the beauty, but at the same time, I had a friend who went to a training, and he came back. He's like, "All right, man, the thing they put in here is 3 strokes and a poke." Pardon? And he said, like, before you say a critical thing, you need to say 3 positive things. I'm like, how hard that's gonna be.
Just do 1-to-1. 1-to-1.
1-to-1.
Like, I have to think of 3 bullcrap nice things to say before I can say the one thing I need to say. Like, But I think one of the telling things to me is that realization that's very blatant in my life didn't even occur to me when you asked the question. Like, I had to dig for a second to get to this thing that's obvious to many people.
I'm just I'm gonna. Is it beneficial to be honest or hyper honest with your kids? It's,
I
I
don't
mean,
know.
I think
I thought it'd be great to be a consultant where I could just poke holes and everything.
I know, like at least I'm waffling here in regards to my kids, because I know that if I would, I tend to be more like you. I tend to be more towards the critical side of things, and it's too easy to just say, hey, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you didn't do that, you didn't do that. And I know that if I do that a lot, it can be like a sore point for them, and it can mess with their what's the word that I'm looking for?
Their self-esteem.
Self-esteem, yeah.
Not self-esteem, but like their confidence.
psyche.
Their confidence.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's where I was going to go. I mean, people that are not watching but listening don't know that I'm wearing like one of my green undershirts from my time in the military. And, just having that experience, that military discipline and being able to like be very rigid and strict about certain things, like I have to constantly police myself because that whatever kind of brainwashing the Marine Corps did, like it's good and it stuck. There's points where I might even bust out the knife hands on the kids, but like, hey, I have to dial it back and realize that's not, they don't need that. Like that's something you volunteer for, not something that you get put upon you by the person that's supposed to be loving you. Like,
To be clear, when Matt said knife hands, what he meant was putting
Karate
your
chop.
hand really flat and talking.
Not actual knives.
it's because I mean, my understanding of the knife hand is that, if you've ever heard that statement, like, yeah, and every time you point a finger at somebody, you've got a bunch of fingers pointing right back at you. Now when I knife hand it,
They're all like
I feel like this story might answer David's question, or it might be a good analogy because it happened yesterday. We went bowling and it was like kids bowl free kind of thing. And so we were in a bowling lane and there was some like high school boys bowling right next to us. And our son is 7 and he gets very like excited when he hits the pins and stuff, and he does like this little side shuffle thing. And the kids next to us were very, very respectful, but they were also like, I'm not going until he's done, and we're not going at the same time, kind of like the bowling etiquette. See, and at one point the kid was ready to go, but he stopped because Bosco had no idea. Side.
Literally standing in front of his lane.
No, ruining the story. So the first part was not paying attention, and I was like, Matt, should we say something to Bosco so he can be aware of bowling etiquette? That if someone's ready to go, you wait until they go and then you go. And Matt's like, no, that's just gonna mess him up. He's gonna be too like in his head or whatever. I was like, okay. So the next like couple tries later, he goes and he gets super excited and he goes to left and he literally goes into their lane. And I'm like, like this is what I was talking about.
And then I knife handed him.
And that, talked to him and you could just see he's like, oh, I fucked up, and just, he did that tense thing that children do when they're getting yelled at. And it's kind of like, where's the happy medium? How much can they handle in their age of development? How do you present it so it's a way that they can actually connect to it? And how do you set them up for success? And those are kind of like my lenses in truth when you're speaking with your children. Like you're not going to just, like you would say to an adult, like, I'm not going to give an example right now, but you filter it through a lens that they can relate to, but you're as open, as honest as they can handle it. So.
And you're probably not going to talk to Bosco the same way you're going to talk to Coraline.
Correct.
Age difference, personality difference, gender difference, all those things play into how you're going to respond to someone.
For sure.
On an adult level, I would also add the agreement between two adults that they're going to actually both be honest. Otherwise, you have to go, I'm going to be a radically honest person.
Right.
That way, I'm assuring that I gather around myself over time people who will always march to the beat of my drum. Right? Because they'll essentially do what they can to please me if they're not honest back, right? So I do think it does take agreement to live a certain way, or else you just end up gathering yourself around a bunch of yes people who just don't want to piss you off.
Well, it goes, that kind of plays into like you teach people how to treat you and stuff, but I feel like it's not that complicated to see that there's like different ways to be honest. Like you don't have to be rude, to be honest. Like, you can say things in so many different ways. I don't know. I guess I don't quite understand why it's difficult to. But then again, like you definitely can't. You can't control how someone else is going to receive what you say, but you can
Control your tact.
Like Jen was saying before, like she's communicates with her coworkers in a different way and whatever. Like, yeah, you know because of past experience for one thing, and for sure with your kids, you know, like like you've learned.
Sort of.
Yeah.
I think if you ask a bunch of S's if they've ever met a D that was as tactful as they think they are, they would say no.
No.
Sure.
And if you ever ask a D if they've met an S that's as honest as they think they are, they would say no. And so part of it is still so much personality and filters. Like you could think, as a dominant person, I was so incredibly tactful and they cried. I don't get it. I told them how I really feel and then they keep doing it. They don't know how you really feel because you think you're telling them and they have no clue.
Yeah.
And so it is one of those, the more mature you get, the more you can realize your personality does really, I won't say use the word hinder because it could hinder you if you're ignorant, but if you're aware of it, you just need to be aware of its presence and your filtration of how things look. Yeah. Oh, I was super honest. Yeah, I can guarantee you they still have no clue what you mean. I was super tactful. I can guarantee you they think you're an ass. So it just depends.
Well, we've been going for, I think, at least about an hour at this point. Maybe it's time to go around the circle. And I think most of our conversation has been around radical honesty. So maybe if you have those vulnerability points that you didn't get to or whatever, now's the time. Or if you still want to keep going on the honesty, whatever. But let's do this.
Definitely. I think for both topics, there is no one right way to operate. And what felt right yesterday isn't going to feel right today, isn't going to feel right tomorrow. And so the more you can get in tune with yourself and the different components that make you, and you can differentiate your head from your heart, from your body, or your hoo-ha, whatever you want to call it, then you can be successful in relating to the people around you and relating to the world, because that's what's really it comes down to. Like, why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? And it's because we've been ingrained to be these social creatures, to interact and to flourish and to make this world a better place. And so the first step is just to connect with yourself and be honest and vulnerable with yourself so you can do it with those around you.
I don't know. I think there's something that kind of ties all these concepts together for me. There's a few things, but one of the ones, a different word we haven't actually thrown around yet in this episode is mindfulness. And there's kind of a language or lots of YouTube videos and blogs around kind of a mindfulness thing. And I would say mindfulness of yourself, being aware, being a watcher, observing, noticing yourself, noticing. One of my favorite little tricks with negative emotions is to step into, I think my favorite word is the one Eckhart Tolle uses, of being a watcher. Become the watcher of your thoughts. Become the watcher of your emotions. Let them flow, but don't let them delude you into thinking that's who you are. And there's something you're experiencing, and there's reasons, and there's a whole lot of stuff around that. But to give yourself a measure of distance from your I amness and your momentary experience. And that is kind of that mindfulness, watcher, awareness, energy. If you want to know a place to start, in my opinion, that is the most important tool that all of these tools kind of assume you have. I don't know if they assume you have, but you definitely need self-awareness in order to do these things well.
So I think something I wanted to end with was if you are watching yourself and working on developing your authentic self, how does that play out and how does that manifest in your life? And I think it was a YouTube video, said the 10 qualities of authentic people. Number 10 was letting go of what people think, let go of perfection, Authentic people can say no. They can accept and learn from haters. They're not afraid to be open and honest. They're good listeners, open to change, value their own time, and they do their work, as in what's important to them. They do something that they enjoy, and they're selectively lazy. And I kind of like that they added that in there, is that you know how to play and you know how to enjoy life, but that all of those things encompass being authentically you.
The thing that I wanted to pull in was about vulnerability, actually. Brene Brown was, before doing the vulnerability stuff, before going more directly into that, she was studying, well, what it came out of, I guess, was studying shame. And so I found it especially interesting that she said that the most vulnerable emotion is actually joy. She says because we're afraid of letting ourselves really feel joy, because then somehow that feels like then it invites something crappy. She calls what most people experience foreboding joy. It's the whole thing of, oh, things are going well. Oh, okay, what's going to go wrong? Like, when's the other shoe going to drop? Like, when is? She says, in the midst of great things, we dress rehearse tragedy. And I thought that was just really interesting to consider, and I feel like I can kind of identify with that. It does feel very vulnerable to truly lean into joy. But it's something to, I think, aspire to. And she said that the thing that people had in common the most, who are able to really experience joy, is those who are grateful and who focus on being grateful in the moment and stuff like that. So that's something that I took away from the vulnerability thing, the whole showing up, even when you can't control the outcome, and then leaning into joy.
One of the things that I've kind of been mulling over as we've been having this talk is the idea of having humility in your self-talk, but also in your relationships with other people. It's a little bit parallel to what Austin was talking about in regards to mindfulness, I think, but having the humility to be able to filter what you're saying in your mind, not thinking too highly of yourself or too lowly of yourself. And also in your interactions with other people, knowing what to say and knowing and being aware of other people's feelings, and being aware of not crushing other people, if you will. And so yeah, that's my takeaway. Okay, how am I going to interact with other people, but give them the respect, give them the honor, and not beat myself up too much or whatever. I don't know.
Going back to something that Joni was talking about that Brene Brown also addressed, and the idea of caring less about the opinions of others. Brene Brown, I think, put it in a really cool way. She said, and this really got to me because I felt like I've definitely been the person that says, I don't care what anybody else thinks. Like I find myself, I don't want to say like countercultural, but also not contrarian, but I often just take the other side wherever people are at and just kind of ask questions that eat away at their perspective, even if I agree with them. Like I will often be that guy. Unsolicited, but
thank you.
But Brown says that, that's bullcrap. That when you say you don't care what anybody else thinks, because you do. But the idea that just be more selective with whose opinion you care about. She references, after her video for vulnerability took off, people said, just don't go to the comment section. And she immediately did. And some horrible shit was written in there. And like there's people that I care about in my life. I care about their opinion. A lot of people may have something to say to me that's direct and not super cool, and maybe it's true to them, but only really receiving the opinions of those people that I love and trust, and I know where they're coming from. I think that's probably helpful for somebody like me. And then going back to my hook, I talked about how the truth will set you free, but it can also hurt really bad. And truth can be something that sets things back a bit, but then it also allows things to go forward more sustainably. And something I think we've all touched on is this idea, like, own your truths, but don't weaponize it. Don't use your truth as a weapon to bludgeon somebody in with. You don't have to do that. You can have tact when you deal with people. You can understand who you're dealing with and address, share your truth in a way that allows you to be transparent and communicate, but also not destroy. That said, I think this was definitely a conversation worth having. I had a good time. I hope everybody else did. You can find our stuff on social media at Epic Ideas. You can hook us up on our Patreon account that you'll find listed on our website, on those social media accounts. And we've got some special content on there. Oftentimes stuff that's recorded before and after the show. Tina works some magic and makes some fun stuff out of that. I know I've laughed a lot at myself, but everybody on here has their moments. It's great. And then thank you again, though, for joining us for this hour or so. Love you.